All right. So, first of all, for those of you, I think I know almost everyone on here, but if we haven't met, I'm Jordan Blackford. I am the Director of Programs for Enactus USA. We're also joined by Chloe Schock. She's one of our Senior Program Managers. She's going to hang out in the back and help us monitor the chat. And then we also have Taylor Fox. He is an alum from Enactus Utah Valley University. And I'm not sure if you guys remember, but their team came in second place or first runner-up at our expo last year in 2018. So I asked him to join us today, and we may be joined by Dalton, also from UVU. I don't know if he's going to join today or not, but yesterday they were both with us, and they have some really cool things to talk about in terms of how their team kind of designs their projects from the very beginning so that they can be considering outcomes all along the way. Okay, so let's get started because today we are going to talk all about what are the right ways to measure and then demonstrate your outcomes at competition. That's a question that we hear all the time in terms of what is it that the judges want to hear? What are the numbers we should be displaying? What about when we're in various stages of our projects, and how do we communicate that to the judges? I've heard that question from many of you before, so I'm sure that it's familiar. And hopefully this is going to help. If you're able to unmute yourself, you may have to play around with your audio settings, but if you're able to join in the conversation at any point, please do, because we also want to hear from you and try to apply this information to your project so that it makes sense to you and there's context. So if you want to share something with us or ask questions at any point, please do. All right, so I just want to get started by reminding everyone that there are 3 stages of measurement when it comes to project management. So who has seen something similar to this that may not have looked like this, but are you at least aware that there are multiple levels within the measurement process? Yeah, Kathy is? Okay. Tiffany, you look a little confused. That's okay. Hopefully you'll learn something. But we're going to get into what falls within each of these stages, but I wanted you to have this visual so that you understand that your project doesn't stop after you've measured that first stage. It may be all that you have to present for the time being or at this year's competition, and that's okay because we're also going to talk about how you present that information, but it doesn't mean that the project is complete or that you've achieved outcomes yet. And what we mean by these 3 stages is initially there's going to be some knowledge transfer, right? Or some skills or information or resources that you've given to your target audience. And a lot of teams stop there. That might be in the form of like, oh, we had a workshop or a seminar and we taught this many people this many things. And a lot of people stop there. So then we go into the intermediate stage. And again, it doesn't stop here. This is when your target audience starts to implement everything that you've taught them and change their behavior. So if I were to give you an example, it would be, let's say you're doing a workshop on workforce readiness and job skills and training. And 100 people came to your workshop. And you might be presenting, 100 people came to our workshop, they learned something about how to better prepare for the workforce. That would be the initial number that you're measuring. And again, you're showing that there was a knowledge transfer. But you wouldn't want to stop there. The intermediate stage would then be, well, okay, who's starting to use what you taught them? Who's starting to update their resume, go out and get more interviews, network? Who's starting to change their behavior through everything that you taught them to do? And that's a really good thing. You definitely want to track that information, but again, it still doesn't stop there. You finally get to the long-term stage, which is what is the result of people changing their behavior? How many landed a job? In this example, because you taught them something, they implemented that knowledge, and then something came of it. That's what we call outcomes. Does anyone have questions about that?
It sounded much more like that was applicable to having workshops or trainings. So how does this apply to where we focus more on innovative new businesses versus training and workshops?
Good question. And I want to ask Taylor what he thinks because UVU, I don't know if you guys are still working on this project, but you presented one last year where you did cell phone charging stations, right?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and I love that process of looking at rather than a workshop, but a startup, and you're helping these innovative ideas take root. But it's almost like you're taking the steps from the knowledge transfer of how to make it or how to sell it, but you're taking it the next step further by teaching them how to create their own system around it. Because we focused on the micro franchise where we gave them a business in a box. And so it wasn't only a knowledge transfer, but we also had a system in place that would work long after we had left the project or had passed it on to them. And then we gave them the incentive or the goal to build a society around this innovative product that they can then replicate and duplicate and really just kind of let them take the reins of the project. So as you can knowledge transfer and as you move down the funnel, I guess, or through the steps, it's a knowledge transfer, it's a skill transfer, and making sure that they do change their behavior around uh, this effective or this product, and then seeing how they're able to then, of their own volition, act, sell, develop, and change their communities or change their world. Does that make sense?
And so in Kathy's case, something that aligns really well with your project, Taylor, is they're working on, hopefully I can share this, Kathy, the Green Energy Center, which is a carbon neutral stove that also produces power for charging phones and stuff. And so it's you can apply that same concept that Kathy, just creating and then introducing the stove into the community is that initial KPI that you want to measure, but then what are you going to do to ensure that their behavior changes so that they use the stove, they understand the stove, the model can be replicated, and then the long term is how have their lives changed because of it? What income have they generated from it? How has their health improved? Some of those things that we've talked about in relation to your project. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess, which we've discussed before, Jordan, is that sometimes that long-term outcomes isn't always there, and it takes quite a while, especially in startups. So it's making sure we understand how to measure in the initial and intermediate stage.
It takes a very long time, and that's what we're going to talk about today as well, because truly empowering projects can take years to develop, and yet you're presenting to the judges at an Enactus competition based on an annual academic cycle. And so how do you make your story relevant in terms of this full stage of measurement, and how are you going to showcase that you have a strategy to get there? So we're going to talk through that as well. I also wanted to highlight that you're probably wondering, like, what would be some examples of types of measurements that would fall within each stage. So I wanted to go over this with you so that, again, you have some context as to what would be an initial measurement versus an intermediate versus long term. So you may have seen something similar like this before in our resources or on our website or one of our trainings, but we like to just use this simple image to discuss the different types of measurement, and hopefully everyone's familiar with this, whether it's through Enactus or any other project management training you've done. If not, you'll learn something, but there are different things that you are putting in your annual report and you are showcasing to the judges through your presentation. First is the inputs. They want to know about what resources were required to pull this project off. That's anything from funding to manpower to ideas to time. That's everything that kind of falls within the scope of the project. And then your outputs are the direct result of all the inputs. So this is, what is that very first deliverable that came from all of your inputs? And this falls within that initial stage. So it's how many people attended a training you were doing, how many products did you make as a result of your input, how many people learned something. It's really kind of a numbers game within the output category. But I did some research to try to help make the definition of outputs and outcomes really clear. And I found a Harvard Business Review article that said that outputs are what enable us to achieve outcomes. But if we're not striving for outcomes, then there's no need for output. So outputs are simply that vehicle that help us get the outcome, but they're not the end game. Outcomes are why the outputs matter. So the outcomes are what can you measure that shows that those outputs were implemented and then improved somebody's livelihood. So that might be jobs that were obtained or created, revenue that was created, a cost savings that was created. Maybe they achieved higher education if that was your goal. So outcomes are how did they take what you gave them, implement it, and now it's improved. And then just to go back to the same chart, looking at, okay, where does that fall within this spectrum of time when we look at measurement? I wanted to show you that you can see outputs fall within that initial stage. Another category you might consider under the initial stage of measurement is reach. Does anyone know what reach is? Or have you ever used this term when you're talking about your projects? Or Taylor, what did you guys call it? Impression?
Yeah, impression, engagement, and conversion. Basically, yeah, it's pretty simple. It's just how many go from impressions to actual engagement in your content or in your project, and then conversions, how many people actually responded, acted, and were changed due to your project.
Yeah, so you're using the exact same concept, just different terminology. So reach is how many people learned about your project. You said how many people engaged, which that would be this intermediate. So how many acted upon it, and then how many were converted, how many because of their action obtained an improvement in their livelihood. And that would also be outcomes.
Hey, Jordan, there is a question from Abigail, and she was wondering what is the best way to measure effective knowledge transfer, especially when working with younger children?
That's a really good question. We have a lot of teams that do education projects, especially with younger children. So Abigail, did you want to share more details about your project so that we can kind of help give some examples?
So we have several field days scheduled throughout the year that work with elementary school kids, some middle school kids, and we work directly with the schools in our area, both public and private schools, to kind of get access to them for 6 or 7 hours or 5 or 6 hours in a day. And it's hard because a lot of times those projects kind of turn into one-hit wonders, and it can be difficult to talk to a kid a year later and say, okay, how do you feel like our project, obviously you can't say, how do you feel our project empowered you to live a healthier lifestyle? Because I don't understand that kind of language. And getting access to the family unit or parents is also difficult because that information is not really available to us. So how do we successfully measure what they're learning year by year? And is there a better way to work with our partners here?
Okay, thank you for that context. And I think that you highlighted the challenge when it comes to working with youth really well, which is how do you follow up and make sure that they implemented what you taught them in the long term? Because first of all, that would require tracking them throughout some period of their lives, right? And then it would also be, do they understand what we're asking them to implement and why? So one thing that we're going to talk about as we get into this a little bit further is how understanding the root cause of the problem really well ultimately leads to outcomes. And so I don't want to jump ahead too much, but it sounds like the work you're doing, you're still in stage one ultimately. And you very much can present that to the judges as long as it's clear that you understand that you're in stage 1. And what I mean by that is you realize that there's this gap in their education, right? You realize that they need some information from you. But do you know why?
We understand some of the root causes. The main root cause of unhealthy living in our area is poverty. We have a pretty high poverty rate.
Okay. And do you understand what variables within your community impact the poverty rate?
Things like drug usage and are pretty high here. Yeah, mostly drug usage and lack of kind of a stimulated economy. There's not a ton of job options.
Okay, good. So I'm glad that you've done that research. And again, we're going to get into this more in the next few slides. So maybe we can use your project as an example. But what the work that you're doing with the children in the schools would definitely be an output, which it doesn't mean that you can't measure that. It just means it's a matter of how you present it and that you're making it clear to the judges that you know that this is only the beginning. And if you truly want to make a sustainable and holistic impact in that community, you have to start addressing the root cause of the problem and not just the symptoms of it. And so it may be that your project evolves over time to where the work that you're doing in the schools is only one aspect of what you're doing. But you may start trying to address other systemic issues within the community that hopefully will achieve a smaller gap in education in the long term. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. And we'll have some more examples as we keep going, and maybe, like I said, if we could refer back to your project, that'll be helpful. Okay, so I wanted to bring up the project Lifecycle with you just briefly because you've probably seen this at some point, either on our Enactus Training Center or if you've come to one of our collaboration summits or anything like that. We really like to talk about the stages of project management. You're probably maybe even tired of seeing it at this point, but I'm using it because I want to make a point to you. And again, take a minute to just sort of absorb this. This is not the most critical part of this presentation, but this is just a reminder of the life cycle has 5 stages. And it starts with project initiation, where you're ideating and understanding the need, then project planning, where you're planning the scope, implementation, then monitoring and evaluating, and then closure. And I use that because I want to demonstrate to you that it is at the 3rd stage of the project lifecycle. So this is what the project lifecycle would look like if we were to use terminology that aligns with the Enactus project. So if we were to take those same 5 stages, but I've inserted terminology that relates to using the Enactus criterion and understanding a needs gap and all of that. So it is on the 3rd stage, which is project implementation, that we can start to gather outputs. It's then that you're starting that knowledge transfer, you're training your target audience on something, you're giving them a resource, whatever that is, and at that point, you can gather outputs. But you wouldn't stop the project lifecycle at stage 3, would you? You would continue the project lifecycle until you get to stage 5. So why stop measuring your outcomes, or in this case, outputs, at stage 3? You don't truly achieve outcomes until stage 4, which is that monitor, evaluation, and control. And that means where you start adjusting the project, making sure your target audience is doing what they need to do, implement what you're teaching them. It's not until then that you really start to see outcomes. And then I'm going to get to stage 5 even later on and talk about how that relates. So I just wanted to give you this visual to show that it really is a long process. And again, it is cyclical, and it doesn't just stop with the first work that you do, the first amount of work or activity that you do on your project. All right. So we're here to talk about how this relates to competition this year. And I wonder how many of you have ever seen this form, first of all, and if you have you taken the time to really study it? We got one comment in the chat. Sorry, it's like taking my computer a minute. Twee, you've seen it. Yeah, you were at competition last year. Okay, good. So some of you look at these each year. And yeah, I saw one that said judging sheet. So yes, this is the individual team evaluation form, or what we call the green sheet. And this is what the judges are trained on, and it's what they're taught to evaluate your projects on. So as you're presenting your outcomes to them, this is what they're hoping you to cover. How well can you demonstrate you did all of these things? So at the top is our judging criterion, and then at the bottom it's broken down in 4 components. And this is where, Abigail, I thought we would get into needs assessment a little bit, because we're going to kind of quickly go through see opportunity and take action, because I really want to get into enabling progress. But the reason that we ask the judges to evaluate in that first section how well you understand your target audience's needs is because if you don't truly understand the root of the problem, it ultimately will only result in outputs. So the fact that you've been doing some research into the community and trying to understand why is there this education gap in the first place is a really good thing. And it's important that you make that known to the judges. And Taylor and the UVU team have a really cool, super fast, effective tool that they use to try to help themselves understand what is the root cause of this problem. So I'll let you explain that, Taylor.
Yeah, so we go through the 5 whys, and it's a really simple process of just like a kid asking why, until you really get to the root of the cause. So one example is if somebody runs their car into a lake and you're setting out to help that person, and you ask, hey, why did you run your car into the lake? You know, a simple question. They say, oh, well, my car's old and rusted up, and you know, the brakes don't work. And then you have to ask, okay, well, why don't your brakes work? And then they say, oh, well, I don't take it to get maintenance, or I don't know how. And then you ask them again, you know, why don't you know how, or why haven't you gone, you know, training on that at all, or any kind of concept of that. And it's cool because as you do the root cause analysis, there are a lot of root problems that can kind of stem out. But if you focus on the root that goes deepest, that will cause the flower that comes from it, as you kind of hit that root the best, it will cause either the flower to bloom, or you can pull the weed out. I like the flower best because that can cause outcomes and cause the stories that you find the best is you find the people who really need it the most. You find the real reason why they need the projects that you do, and then the outcomes produce the stories that then you can present on. And that's what the judges really remember is you can go through these steps and say, hey, this is what happened, this is why, and we found this and this and this. Here's the data, here's the stories, and this is what happened when we were able to help them. And that really strikes the chord with the judges, is they find that you've done your preparation, you've done your research, and here are the results, and here are the stories.
So Abigail, can you kind of see what I was getting at when I was asking, well, why is there an education gap? And then you said poverty, and then they said, well, what's the cause of poverty in your community? Can you kind of see where I was going with that?
Yeah, that's a really helpful tool. Thank you. I really like that. I'm going to use that.
Awesome. And we really like to point that out because, again, if they're a smart judge, which hopefully all of your judges are intelligent when they're listening to you talk about your projects, but they're gonna know to ask you, you know, what's your plan for sustainability for this project? And we're gonna get into that as well. But they know that if you don't know the root cause and you're not addressing that, and you're only putting a Band-Aid on the wound, that you don't have a plan for sustainability. So has anyone ever had a judge ask them a question like that before, where they were like, what are you going to do to make sure this project sustains itself over time? It's a question that comes up a lot, and it's important to tie that back to the needs assessment, because in the case of creating like a curriculum or education program for youth, if your team is not there to continue that year over year, and you haven't looked at why there's this gap and close it in the long term, then they don't see that sustainability. So that's what they're asking for. Okay, hold on, let me make sure we don't have a question before I move on. Yes, many times, Kathy says. Yeah, they really like that question. Okay, so the second piece of our criterion that they're looking for you to demonstrate is how well did you apply entrepreneurial action? Does anyone want to take a stab at what you think that means in relation to Enactus projects?
I see it as, like starting some kind of thing, either like a program or like a business to address like the need that or opportunity that you're seeing.
Yeah, that's definitely a part of it. It's about addressing the need. But what we mean by it is specifically about your approach to addressing the need. And so again, I was trying to find a really clear definition of how to describe this to you guys. And we actually have a session or a series of modules on our Enactus Training Center about defining social entrepreneurship that Chloe, who's also on this call, has helped us put together. And so I pulled some articles off of that, and there is a doctored piece from Duke University who specializes in social entrepreneurship. And he defines social entrepreneurship, because that's essentially what we're doing here, as being an entrepreneurial venture that creates both social and economic value. So it's not one or the other. We're not asking you to just create social value, which would be sort of the charity or NGO model. We're not necessarily asking you to create just economic value, which would just be traditional entrepreneurship, but that you combine the two, and the approach that you're taking solve people's problems, that's the social value, in an entrepreneurial way, that's the economic value. So Kathy, your project, the Green Energy Center, is a perfect example of this. You want me to talk about it, or do you want to share just like a brief, how is the Green Energy Center an entrepreneurial approach to a problem in the communities you're working in?
You can go ahead.
Okay, I'll try to give it my best effort, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. So the City U Enactus team identified that there were pretty serious social issues within the communities that they're working in. It started in Caban, it went to Puerto Rico, and now Guatemala. And they were dealing with health issues related to cooking over kerosene stoves or wood burning stoves, or both.
It's to solve the problem of cooking with fire. So
yeah.
I can do it. I just was trying to see if. So the project is to deal with the issue that there's 3 billion people cooking with fire worldwide. 4 million deaths are caused by the unhealthy air, but it also causes major carbon emissions, which contributes to our climate change. So we first were solving it with a clean cook stove that also produced power. You're right, went to Puerto Rico and Gabon with that. And now we're also looking at expanding clean cook stove stores in Guatemala. So not just the stove that we designed that we ended up having issues with manufacturing at a good price, but also then doing stores. And we actually have a couple other new initiatives that I don't really want to share right now because they're really new. So I want to make sure that we are a little bit more fleshed out before we tell everyone.
Yeah, that's fine. That's good. I just, thanks for that overview, because I wanted to make the point that you set off to solve what seems like a social challenge, which are health issues related to, and probably environmental issues as well, related to burning over wood stoves or using biomass. And the team worked with a group of engineers to create this entrepreneurial approach to solving that problem, where these stoves that are now carbon neutral, not only do they charge phones, which owners of the stove can use to generate income, but they also create biochar, which is a product that can be used as fertilizer. So that's another income generating source from that stove. And so that's an example of how you would use an entrepreneurial approach to overcoming this challenge that might be related to something, or something that seems unrelated, like health or environmentalism or education or whatever it is that you're trying to address. Okay. So I want to zoom in on this last piece of it because this is where the most emphasis on outcomes is when it comes to the green sheet. And there's a word that we do not include in this that almost every team uses in their presentation or annual report or both. And I even tricked Taylor with it yesterday. The UVU team didn't even recognize what that word is. Can anyone just look over the words on this green sheet right here? Is there anything you see that's missing that you would often use when you're talking about your project results? No? All right, that means I got you guys too. That word is impact. How many of you, when you're presenting your projects, present impact numbers? That's the most common terminology that's used when teams are talking about their projects, is we directly or indirectly, yeah, so you guys use them, we directly or indirectly impacted this many people. And I know that that gets tricky because if any of you have ever filled out our team portfolio report, or if you're going to fill it out this year, we ask for impact. And there's a good reason for that, and that's because we use that report for non-competition purposes, but rather for our organizational annual report. And impact is essentially a way of lumping all the outcome categories together, but it means something very different to every person. So we don't train the judges on impact and we don't put it on their green sheet. We ask them to look specifically for outcomes because that is a much more specific number. And remember what we talked about in relation to outcomes? An outcome is why the output matters. It is the result of the behavioral change caused by the outputs. So if we were to use just that really simple example again, and I know that this does not relate to every project, but it's just a pretty basic example that we have of some attempt to help people enter the workforce. The output would be how many did you train? Then that intermediate stage would be how many started changing their behavior because of it, using that information. And then the outcome is how many gained something that improved their livelihood because of their behavioral change. So how many got a job in this case? So that's what the judges are looking for you to demonstrate. And along with that is that you empowered people, because outcomes are achieved by using an empowerment approach. What do you guys think empowerment means? I feel like we drill this term into your heads at pretty much every training opportunity that we have.
The transfers of knowledge and skills?
Close, that's part of it. That's the first half. There's an equation that we use. It is knowledge and skills plus implementation. That's empower. So empowerment. Taylor, you guys have a good example with fish that kind of meets the like fishing philosophy cliche. What was your example yesterday?
Oh yeah, well, we explain it to people that it's, you know, you give a man a fish, he feeds for a day. We can talk about that being like an input, right? We're giving people fish, but if you teach a man how to fish, then that's the next step above it is, yeah, the man now knows how to fish. Well, the empowering people is you teach that man how to fish, but not only how to fish, but also build a fishing business, and that he's actually going out and creating a fishing business where that employs other people. And you have that domino effect where you've empowered an individual who's in the community, who has stake in that community to build that community. He will go out and he'll build a fishing business, which will then empower that community. So it's a very much a teach a man how to fish, he feeds for a day. You teach a man how to fish, he feeds for a lifetime. You teach him how to build a fishing business, the community feeds for a lifetime and on. So that's what we use as a kind of fun little story.
Yeah, so as much as we hear it, empowerment is not just giving somebody the knowledge, the skills, the resource, giving them fish, even teaching them to fish. It's helping them implement that in their own lives so that they can improve their own livelihoods, they can improve the livelihoods of others, they can achieve outcomes. So the I just want to see that you're using that philosophy in your projects and you're thinking about that long term, which leads to the fact that you're planning for sustainability. And in the next slide, I want to get into sustainability, but it kind of circles back to, again, that original needs assessment of, did you plan your project, or are you strategizing so that in the future, your project can sustain itself even without your team's involvement. Okay, so I sort of asked this earlier, but how many of you have had a judge ask you something like, what's your exit strategy? Or how do you see this project sustaining itself in the long term? Yeah, Tiffany, you've had that. I think a few others have said that that comes up often. And it does, because, sorry if I pause, I'm just like trying to read the chats and make sure that we're staying. Yeah, Zoe, you guys have definitely been asked that. That's probably one of the most common questions that I hear from the judges when I'm watching Q&A is, what'll happen when your team is no longer involved in this project? And the judges are asking you that because they want to make sure that you set your project up in a way, or at least are setting your project up in a way that if your team ever has to exit from that project, then it will sustain itself. Because a project by definition has a start date and an end date. So if anything that you're doing within your project is an activity that requires your team to continue doing that activity time and time again, it doesn't mean your project's a failure. It means you're somewhere in a middle stage and you've still got work to do to make sure that eventually your team can stop doing those activities and the project will go on and people will continue to benefit from it. And so that means creating systemic change. It means working with your stakeholders and understanding who needs to be involved in taking those activities over, what role they need to play, what training and knowledge you need to transfer them, sort of the train the trainer model, and how this project is going to be maintained. Does anyone have an example you want to share that you learned from, where maybe you had a project that eventually your team quit doing and then it failed or it didn't go as well as you wanted, and then you learned something from that?
If anything, from us at UVU, we've learned so many things from our failures. And it's funny that when you mention it to the judges, they can identify a lot with you, coming from a sense of, hey, we're students, we're still figuring this whole thing out. The whole world is way behind us, and we're just trying through, try and fail kind of mentality. They'll understand and they'll like that. A little bit of raw, a little bit of experience. They'll be like, yeah, these are students trying to figure out, and these failures will bring the judges into your circle and make them feel like they're a part of the iteration process, which is by no means perfect, and will really help them identify with you. And also you'll learn a ton, because we failed on tons of projects, and you only polish up the few that you have in store, and you're like, all right, we're going to stick these two in front, but we'll hide all the 100 failures. Well, that's what basically every team does. So it's pretty great.
Yeah, that's a really good point to make. And honestly, it's a good segue into this last slide that I have, which is where I wanted to make the point that when you're honest about the stage of the project that you're currently within, and you speak to those setbacks and you demonstrate that you recognize that your project may not have achieved outcomes yet, but that you are willing and you have a strategy to get there, that's really what compels the judges. And we've had examples of teams going up there and presenting projects many times before that were not complete. But again, they were willing to speak to that and discuss their strategy for getting there, or even discuss, this was a setback we had and this is what we learned from it. And those teams have done really well. John Brown University is an example. In 2017, they won our national championship. They did a phenomenal job. They have great projects, but they presented 3 projects that were all very much in the early stages. They had not truly achieved large outcomes on any of them yet, and yet they were a winning team because the content that they presented broke it down similar to the image that I have right here. where they identified 3 main stages of their project, where I put in the actual project life cycle within each of these stages to show you what that would look like. And they were open and honest about, this project is only in stage 1, or this project is in stage 2, but here's what we've done so far to get there, and then here's our strategy and where we're going to get to stage 3. And that may be 1 or 5 years from now, but we know that the project doesn't stop here. And that appealed to judges because they understood, this team understands, you don't stop at outputs. The project's not yet sustainable. So being able to share that as part of your story is really important. And I can't remember exactly what we said, Taylor, but yesterday we were taught, you guys said something that was really helpful about what is most meaningful to judges. Like, do they truly care about the numbers, or do they care about the strategy?
Oh, I think it was, we use the numbers to back up our stories. And in the end, judges are like, so much data, so many projects are thrown at them in one day that it's going to be hard for you to stand out. So circling full circle to the root and cause analysis, if you can groom those flowers and make a story that is a beautiful flower and be able to say, you know, the data drives this, but this is a story of a person that we've helped change their world. And being able to bring in that emotion, that'll be what seals the deal and what takes you up to the whole nother level. And there's a lot of teams that do it out there, and being able to watch how they communicate that vision and those stories with the data in their presentations and also in their materials, that is what pushes them to become national champions from those who just kind of tell data, tell outcomes, but they don't tell stories. And so focusing on those stories and blending in that data will really give your presentation a very beautiful appeal to the judges that will help them remember it.
Before we wrap up, we have 10 minutes that I just want to see if anyone has questions about any of the slides we went over. Do you want to back up? Do you have something you want to share about a project and ask, how does this apply? Let's just open it up to everyone.
I have one question. Earlier we talked about reach. I was basically how many people learned about your project, right? I was curious to know how you would use those numbers in terms of now that you know how much reach you have, what can you do with that information to benefit your project, if that makes sense?
Taylor, do you want to speak to what strategy do you guys use to turn those people who you've impressed upon to helping convert them all the way to taking action on your project?
Yeah, I'd love to. So it's a cool, I'm in marketing and I love the idea of reach. So impressions are great. If you think about impressions, you think of like billboards on the freeway, and those are great. And people who love billboards will always say, wow, billboards are awesome. You throw up something, everyone looks at it on their morning and afternoon drive. But really, how much of us actually act on what we see in the billboards, right? It's so quick and fleeting, and that's similar to what we see on social media, on conventional advertising and things like that. So adding your impressions into your data or your presentation data will only go so far, because any executive, anyone that manages any kind of marketing will only take that with a grain of salt, and they'll say, okay, that's like Facebook likes. Nobody, and those are a little bit better because that's people engaging with it. So you go from a big impression base to an engagement base, which is people liking it, or let's say in a project format, they come to a seminar or they like some sort of advertising or some kind of thing that you've put out there, they've responded. But then the conversion's the key thing, because that means that they saw your ad, they came to a seminar or webinar, and they came, like all of you came, and they're interacting. And so from that conversion, being able to break it down from those 3 grades will really help the judges see that you're not just publishing something on a billboard, but you're bringing people step by step into your project, and then you're able to keep track of them. And that's where it really that's where you'll get the best stories is somebody says, yeah, I saw your ad in the newspaper. I guess newspapers still exist. And I acted on it, and now I'm here, and I like what you're training me to do, and what's next, right? And those are the people that we really try and focus on and develop a relationship with, is because then as the project ends right there, then the next project can begin with that person or with what they're trying to do to really create empowerment. So it's trying to break it down from impressed people who say, oh, that's nice, to they engage, to they convert, and then keeping track of that data relative to what happens, and seeing who takes your information or your project and goes with it. And that's really what, I mean, if you can do those steps, that will blow judges out of the water, because they'll say, wow, these students were actually keeping track of who they found and what they did. And now they have projects for the future because these people they've empowered are now coming to them with these projects. So that's kind of what we focus on, at least to the best of our ability.
Yeah, and I just want to add, I have to agree with Taylor that I think it will impress the judges much more that you can demonstrate who did something with your reach, because I hear a lot of teams say like, oh, we had this media publication or we were interviewed on the news or whatever, and we know that it could have reached 1.2 million people, let's just say, because we know that 1.2 million people subscribe to that news channel. And that's, to Taylor's point, that's a huge number, but what does it really mean? Who's really going to take that seriously and say, oh, yeah, that means 1.2 million people must be acting on your project? I mean, that's not realistic to assume that. Otherwise, we would have solved all the world's problems by now and could all go home. But we know that not all of them that are learning about it are paying attention or acting upon it. So if you can show the judges, yeah, we reached this many people, but then because of that, 3 contacted us and they're now doing this on our project. That number sounds small, but it's so much more powerful than just some large number that means nothing. Anyone else have questions before we wrap up? Any slides you want me to go back to and go back over? Okay, well, we are going to archive this webinar online. It'll be up probably next week, and so if you were taking notes and missed anything, you'll have access to this slideshow, so don't worry. And if you have questions that come up later on, you can reach out to me or you can reach out to your regional program manager. All right, thanks everyone. We'll see you later. And thank you, Taylor, for helping us out.
Happy to help. Thanks, Jordan.
Bye.
Bye.